16th, and I'm sitting down for my second cup of coffee. I wanted to actually let you know this morning you saw me post this on Facebook on Twitter the other day, but I'm actually drinking New Mexico Pinion coffee this morning, and it always is good to have a taste of home. So the pinion trees back in New Mexico, the smell of them, and just the picking of pinions, which is something we do on the Navajo Nation a lot. It's good to have this brand, the Pinion Coffee from New Mexico, and good to have a taste of home this morning. So in my Bluebird mug, I'm drinking some New Mexico Pinion Coffee and sitting down pondering life and politics and our world we're living in right now. And I wanted just to share a few thoughts with you. As I do every morning, before I speak, I want to just acknowledge that I'm talking to you from what's now known as Washington, D.C., and that these are the lands of the Piscataway. And I want to acknowledge and thank the Piscataway for their stewardship of these lands. They are the nation indigenous to these lands. They were here long before Columbus got lost at sea, and they are still here. And so a hat to my Piscataway relatives. Thank you for the honor of living on these lands. And I want to acknowledge your stewardship of these lands and that you are the indigenous hosts of these lands. So there's a lot of things that we need to be discussing right now, right? If you've been following me on social media, you'll know I put out a pretty strongly worded tweet over the weekend and on my Facebook and Instagram, basically rebuking President Trump. I live here in Washington, D.C. While I did not go down into the midst of the protests, I was down there near the mall on Saturday, a few hours before they started, and I saw the setup for it beginning to happen. I saw the people coming into the mall. Again, some of the groups of people I saw were not wearing masks, and I also saw on media that President Trump came out and drove his limo in the midst of his supporters, encouraging this protest of an election that he very clearly lost, and an election that he has not yet conceded. And it is merely a vain attempt of what he's doing right now, seemingly to just feed his own ego and deal with his own narcissism. And the fact that he's doing this, encouraging this behavior of his supporters who feel it is their political statement to attend things in public and not wear masks in the midst of the sharpest rise of COVID infections in the entire pandemic. We are hitting over 100,000, even close to 150,000 new infections a day. We have over 1 million infections in the past week alone. And President Trump is not only encouraging this reckless behavior of his supporters, but he's doing it while he's sitting in the safety of his own limo, going to play golf at one of his luxury resorts. And it was one of the most irresponsible actions of a leader that I can ever recall seeing. It was pathetic to see what President Trump will do to smooth his own ego. And even his supporters acknowledged they came down in front of the White House so that they could help their president feel better. Actually, I'm ashamed to say our president, not just their president. He's the president of the United States of America. He's our president, and I'm actually very ashamed of that. I'm ashamed of Donald John Trump being the president of the nation of which I'm a citizen, which is why I ran against him. But so I put that out there, and I still immediately call on him to concede this election. His actions are not helpful. While I will agree that our system is deeply, deeply flawed, it's not flawed and rigged in the way that he's saying it's rigged. And actually, it's rigged in a way that allowed him to come to power in the first place, right? He's the president who lost the vote in 2016 by 3 million people. He lost the popular vote by 3 million, yet he still got elected. The system, President Trump, is absolutely rigged. It's rigged in your favor. It's the reason you are in power in the first place. And the flaws are not there to work against you. They're actually there to work for you, which is the reason I ran and the things I'm trying to point out. And so, yeah, I call on President Trump to immediately concede the election, and to encourage better behavior, or to model, I would say, better behavior for your supporters, Mr. President. And also to use the last few weeks of your time in office to actually do some good for our nation. We are going to see a huge rise in infections over the next few weeks and months, especially between Thanksgiving and Christmas, with this holiday that's going to see a lot of gathering of family members and people around the country. And we need to see our leaders model better behavior and model give a better example of how we should be conducting ourselves during this time. So I hope that's how President Trump will use this lame duck session of the next few weeks until the inauguration, when Joe Biden is inaugurated as our 46th president of the United States. A few other thoughts I wanted to share with you. There was a tweet that I was tagged in over the weekend, and this kind of gets into what I'm talking about, of what I'm doing right now. You know, in my last cup of coffee, I talked about the need to continue to teach this common memory. And while there's not a campaign we're running for right now, and there's not anything immediately we can do to address this except to continue to point out some of the challenges we're facing, one of the things I'm working very hard to do in the next 2 years is to continue to teach this common memory and to talk about the doctrine of discovery. My book is out there. I'm bringing that into conversations. I'm promoting it. I've done a few podcasts this past week regarding my book. I've given several lectures on the doctrine of discovery online these past several weeks, and I'm continuing to try and teach this common memory of our nation's colonial and even genocidal history. And there was a tweet that went out over the weekend, and it said, "If you have not done so, I challenge you to perform 2 tasks today. The first is watch Navajo presenter Mark Charles's 99-minute PowerPoint, The Doctrine of Discovery," linked below. Then, number 2, go back to what you were doing as though nothing happened. This person who tweeted that, I think his name is Harry Allen. I'm assuming he found the video, which is on my Wireless Hogan YouTube channel. And it's a 99-minute, about an hour and a half presentation I gave several years ago on the doctrine of discovery. It's one of the first presentations I gave that went into depth on Lincoln and his legacy within our nation. And when you see this history laid out, especially in a more condensed format, an in-depth but condensed format in a single sitting, this 99-minute video, it is mind-boggling and it's difficult to take in, right? Especially if you believe our nation is generally good and values things like freedom and equality. To see this history laid out in a condensed format and to see these quotes, to see the deconstruction of some of our heroes can be overwhelming. And he saw that, and then, you know, to go back after that and just pretend like, oh, I can just now keep living my life as if I didn't know what I've learned in the past hour and a half. It's impossible to do, right? It's not only is it disrupting, but it's really paradigm shifting. And I was really pleased that that was his experience, I'm assuming, when he watched it himself, because he challenged people to watch this video and basically said, see how you cannot just go back to life as normal after you understand this history. This is really what I want to do in the next 2 years. One of the reasons I think the election we had, the campaign we ran in 2020 was not as effective as it could have been, is because by and large, our nation doesn't know its history. And it doesn't know how deeply foundational and how systemic and institutionalized our problems are our racism, our sexism, and our white supremacy. And so they were able to be captivated by the solutions put forth by Joe Biden or by Donald Trump, which were not addressing the foundations. They were just addressing the window dressing, the more surface challenges we're facing. And they offered surface level solutions. And so, yeah, this is my job over the next 2 years, is I am going to do my best. And I want to encourage, especially those who supported our campaign. I've gotten a lot of emails and questions about how can we continue to move this forward. And it's in times like this, especially in the next 2 years until the midterm elections, now that we have a Democratic president who is going to be more implicitly racist, sexist, and white supremacist instead of explicitly racist, sexist, and white supremacy that we had in the last administration, where you're going to see it's going to be more of a challenge to talk about these issues. And so I want to encourage you to not only use some of the resources that I put out, but to do resources that other people have put out regarding the doctrine of discovery, regarding this history, and just work with me, and especially even within your own circles, to continue to expose people to this history, to help create this common memory. And that will pay huge dividends in going into the next election, into 2022, the midterm elections, and into whatever we end up doing in 2024. So I want to encourage people to continue to work to try and do this, to try and teach this history and expose people to this. The other thing I wanted to talk about briefly is I've been listening to and thinking a lot about our foreign policy, especially some of the policy we have towards China. And for those of you, especially even the younger generation, you'll know that the Trump administration had put this ban on TikTok, and that there was a lot of discussion about our foreign policy, and especially our trade deficit with China, and some of the policies of China and our foreign policy. And one of the things I have not talked about, I did not talk about in depth during the campaign, I did begin to touch on it with our allies, is that the United States of America is still a deeply colonial nation. We are a colonial nation. This is how we conduct ourselves. This is how we were founded. We have not gotten rid of the doctrine of discovery. We have not gotten rid of this colonial mindset. We still use the doctrine of discovery as our understanding for land titles. We still have a relationship of exploitation, not only with marginalized peoples, but with the environment. And we are still extremely colonial as a nation. And that's some of our shared values that we have with most of our closest allies, whether it be the UK, France, Germany, the Netherlands, other European Union nations. We have a shared value and a shared history of colonialism with these nations. And that's what bonds our nations together today. And when you heard me talk in the campaign, and I suggested, well, we should I would like to nominate a Native American as my Secretary of State. Part of that was so we could begin to address this shared value and shared history of colonialism with our allies, especially those from Europe and those within NATO. But I'm also beginning to ponder and look at how that, what I would actually say is a shared value of colonialism, impacts our foreign policy towards China. And one of the key differences because there's no denying that China is also another colonial nation. And we have a shared value for colonialism with the country of China. We also have a shared value for colonialism with the country of Russia. We can talk more about that later. But what's interesting about our shared value of colonialism with China is, rather than being an ally, as they are, as our European nations are, because they're white, China is not an ally because one of the reasons I would argue is because they're not white. And a big part of our colonialism is rooted in the lie of white supremacy. And so for years, we treated China as less than. And we worked hard to assimilate them to our values, which we probably were pretty effective in that. I think they've learned a lot from our colonial values and are imitating them quite well. But we haven't really addressed the fact that we have a lot of shared values for colonialism with China. And I think one of the problems we're facing is that we don't want to see them as peers as a country, at least our white leaders don't. And so they treat China as a threat, but that threat is not solely rooted in, but is somewhat rooted in our value as a nation, our historical value for white supremacy. And I don't think we've addressed that well in our relationship with China. And these are some of the things that I think we need to begin exploring, is as we need to try and deconstruct our own colonial values, and especially begin to deconstruct our value for white supremacy and the lie of white supremacy and all the ways it's infiltrated our foundations and our nation and has deeply influenced our foreign policy. I think if we could deconstruct our value, our both implicit and explicit value for white supremacy, and deconstruct our value for colonialism, we might be able to build a better relationship with the nation of China. And that's something I don't quite have it figured out how we would address that. But I think it's something we need to begin looking more closely at. And it's something I'm going to begin paying a lot more attention to, is what has our policy. You know, one of the things that kind of pricked my ears is I heard some reports over the weekend was that there's actually not a whole lot of difference between what the underlying values of what the Trump administration was trying to address with China and the underlying values of what the Biden administration is going to try and address with China. Again, their biggest difference between Trump and Biden is not the underlying values that they have, but how they communicate those, where Trump is much more rough around the edges and much more explicit, and Biden is much more nuanced and much more passive aggressive. And so, but the underlying values are still the same. And so I think that's one of the things that I've heard, that the two administrations are going to have some of the same underlying values, and they're going to go about achieving those ends differently. But the values are going to be very similar. And so this is where I think we need to begin, and I really want to begin exploring how deeply our lie of white supremacy and our very intact values for colonialism have huge implications and get played out differently with our allies in Europe and with other nations around the world that look differently, but actually hold a lot of the same values that we hold. So that's just something I've been pondering in these past few days, and it's something I'm going to be talking about more, because definitely as we are facing some of the global challenges that we're facing, we need to begin to understand how our core values have impacted not only our domestic policies, but have deeply influenced our foreign policies. The last thing I want to talk about is just these rising COVID-19 numbers. And I want to encourage people to please social distance, to please wear your masks when you're out, to please limit your gatherings over Thanksgiving to your immediate household. There is, of course, an expectation, and it's easier to let your guard down with family members and to not social distance or to not wear masks in those settings, or to think, well, we all know each other, we're going to be okay. That's not how this virus works. And so I want to encourage people, as we see the numbers rising and as we expect, the nation expects them to rise even further, especially after Thanksgiving and going into the new year, we are hitting incredibly high numbers of new infections daily. And our death rates are also rising, and they're well over 1,000 and are probably on their way to surpassing 2,000 deaths a day. And we need to remember that wearing a mask is not a political statement. Wearing a mask is not giving up of your liberties. Wearing a mask is a way that you can not only value your own life, but to show value and respect for the life of the global community and of your local community, and especially of those most vulnerable within that community. And so rather than thinking of it as you're being robbed of your rights, look at it as an opportunity to serve and to care for those who are most vulnerable within your community, and as a way that you can give even sacrificially of yourself to protect the health of those who are more vulnerable than maybe you are. And so, yeah, this is going to require humility, which is something our nation is not very good at. This myth of American exceptionalism, that we have the right to behave differently and act differently, and we're affected by things differently than the rest of the globe, is a lie. It's not true. And we need to be very, very humble in the way that we conduct ourselves, and actually just make choices to value the lives of others as much as we would value our own, which again, something that we don't value much here. And so we need to change that. But I want to encourage everybody, please protect the health of your family members, protect the health of those most vulnerable in your community, social distance, have Thanksgiving with your immediate household, and begin to think creatively about what we can do to connect with people in a way that's safe. One of the things I'm pondering doing, I've actually been looking at what I can do here in our house. I want to set up a place where I can actually have a virtual cup of coffee with people. Set up almost like a table where I'm not sitting just as a face on a screen, but I can be more back and project it onto maybe a larger television, and actually sit like I'm having an actual cup of coffee, and then try to contact friends, our colleagues, our people who I'm wanting to get to know. Just like I would say, hey, let's go meet in the coffee shop, I can say, hey, let's get on Zoom and let's actually just sit down and have a cup of coffee and talk and chat a bit more casually. Kind of like I'm doing on this live stream. I may even change the setting of this live stream as I find a way to set this up in our house here. But acknowledging that, yeah, we're going to probably be in this disrupted mode for more than just a few more months. Could well go into the spring and maybe even to the fall of 2021. And so we need to begin, as I've always said, be thinking long-term about this and what are the ways that we can cope best with this. So I want to encourage people to think creatively and to do what you need to do to be creative, to keep yourself safe, to protect the health of those in your community, but also to make sure that we are getting the social interaction and the engagement that we need, even though we can't get it physically at this moment. So those are a few thoughts I've had for the day. We're going to continue doing these second cups of coffee. I'm going to continue doing these, and I really think they're a good way to connect with people. So I my relatives, walk in beauty. May we learn how to walk in beauty together. Hakone.